Starting the recording, and we're off to the races.
Recording in progress.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the second lecture in the series on Xenophon's Socratic discourse, the Oikonomicus, and the philosophy of stewardship and home economics. The philosophy of stewardship and home economics is the basis of what we are doing here. And then or I guess it's the theme. And then this text by Xenophon is the sort of the spine of the series. And it's relatively short. And I wanted to do it this way because, with previous seminars that I've done, we never had a reading that was short enough to reread multiple times in the course of a year. And the thing about this one in particular is that is exactly the case. It is short enough that you can easily read and reread it. And we'll be doing a little bit of that reading today. But first, I want to say a couple of sort of housekeeping things. First of all, these will always happen on the first Sunday of the month unless something comes up. And they will probably happen around this time, which is 2 p.m., which might be an inconvenience for some of the people who will be joining from the UK. I'm sorry about that. In some cases, we might do it earlier, and in some cases, we might have to reschedule. But it's really hard for me to say with certainty how anything's going to look because everything this year looks very different on a month-to-month basis. But what I am trying to say for certain is that it's just going to be Sundays, first Sunday of the month. The time, there might be some moving that around until we find what really works. Now, with all of that said, I welcome you all here, and I welcome you to be thinking about if you are doing a practicum as a part of this series. If we were on the schedule that I wanted to be on, then at the beginning of this month, this first lecture of February would have occurred. And then we would have also done the practicum where we, pulled out the vision boards and went over everything. And for those who are here who saw before we started recording my vision board that is coming together, very little of it is actually put together. And that's because it's one of those things that I'm doing up against the deadline, right? And the deadline being something that is ambiguous and seemingly moving into the distant future is something that, makes it so that this project is not really coming together as quickly as I'd like it to. But the reason it's moving around is because Dad is going to be there for that conversation. He has to be there for that conversation. And he actually has to be there in person for it. And so for those who don't know, maybe you didn't see the practicum first session in which I introduced my mom and my dad, who have accumulated like 60 years of knowledge on both cultivation and construction, two of the most important principles of stewardship. You can't be a good steward in this life, much less a capable human being, without care and thought about cultivation and construction. I suppose that there could be an exception, and that would be if you were just institutionalized in a culture where this was just embodied knowledge, and then maybe you wouldn't have to think about it so much. But those of us coming to the philosophy of stewardship in a world where this is not institutionalized, it's not just a shared background condition of our knowledge because of specialization, the division of labor, etc. It's something that we actually have to think deeply about and reflect on and practice. And so, this is my vision board coming together. It's got 3 photos. It's got me as a kid looking really cool right here. with a guy, Gary Joyner. And then it's got me and Ann doing jujitsu. And then it's got, what is this? Ann holding a baby. It's not our baby, but it's it gets the point across. And so these are important things. It's just a reminder of kind of like who I am, where I come from, and where we're going, as well as that side of our life that is more active and engaged, right? That side of ourselves that is practicing war before dinner time, right? And so, for anybody who has been reading from the Oikonomicus, there's this awesome part where Socrates is telling Critobulus, this rich kid who is irresponsible, about how Cyrus, the king of Persia, never goes to dinner if he has not first spent some time either cultivating land and farming or practicing for war. And then Socrates argues that these are the two most important things when it comes to like being competent, having a good life. And so, war, I guess it's a little interesting. We could talk about the reasons why war games might have been necessary then and are not necessary any longer. But I am going to say, no, I think the basic principle applies. The mammal in you, the animal in you, requires action. It requires adventure. It requires risk, right? It requires these things. And so you can find that in all kinds of different forms. You don't have to do jujitsu, but you have to find ways for physical will to power to actually kind of get off the leash, right? And so some people, that's being a jogger, a cyclist, right? There's different ways of doing that might be less action adventure-y and more kind of just like you get into a flow and that's cool. Maybe like lifting weights might be part of it. But this is part of life. It's part of living a good life. It's part of taking care of your body, making sure that your body is actually useful to you, right? Care and maintenance is what good stewardship is all about. Making sure that the things that are in your possession are cared for and useful to you, right? And that means being good stewards of our bodies, thinking about what we put into our bodies, thinking about the things that we actually do. Because if you're intellectually inclined, as I am, then the chances are you are especially susceptible to screened capture, right? You could easily forget you have a body and get sucked into your screen and then find yourself feeling super anxious a week or two later, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that's what Socrates is ultimately getting at in his conversation with Critobulus when bringing in Cyrus, the king of Persia, except that obviously when he's talking to Critobulus, it's a lot more obvious that exercise is important, right? That war games are important because they might get invaded like by the Spartans or whatever. So it's like they actually have to stay on top of it. And also, if you get invaded, you're not even going to get killed. You're going to get made into a slave probably. So, the philosophy of freedom means refusing to become someone's slave, which is not merely saying, oh, if someone tries to take you as a slave, you kill yourself. No, it means living your life in a way that means that you are capable of defending yourself, right? And this is just, it's deep. It's deep, and it speaks to me more and more as I try to get in touch with everything that the last 15 years of study and research has removed me from. And that prior to that, all my time in base low skill labor kinds of jobs had also removed me from. Because if you're doing basic wage labor, you are removed from a lot of the basic kinds of care for yourself that are actually necessary, right? Workers need this more than anybody. So farming comes in as important as this caring for your body, but it also relates because it is a form of exercise, right? I would elaborate on this in my own ways, and I will throughout the course of this series, but I first want to read you all something that I wrote today, and then we'll talk about it. I'll come back to lecturing. I want to put on the board two words. They are names. One is Lasch, and the other is Harrington. And the reason I'm putting them on the board is so I don't forget to come back to them, because otherwise it'd be very easy to not really touch on them the way that I want to. Both of them are talking about the family, and both of the texts recommended for this month, and that I hope you'll be inspired to read because of this month, are absolutely essential to thinking about stewardship in the 21st century, but also for reclaiming your life, which is ultimately what the philosophy of stewardship is all about. It's about reclaiming your life and challenging the commodification of your life, right? The family, if it's just an institution, if it's just a social construct, if it's just an economic calculation, is a pathetic thing of obligation. But the family might be something else entirely. And I'm going to obviously say that it is, as will Harrington and Lasch. Now, if you're coming into this with, having seen everything so far, then you might be aware that, Dr. Scott Yenner gave a lecture that was essentially his challenge to feminism, or his critique of feminism from a conservative standpoint, an unabashedly conservative standpoint. From his position, feminism is the primary culprit. It's not the economic conditions that drive liberalism, and then liberalism drives feminism. And so you have like this domino effect that results in a bad form of feminism making things difficult on families. No, it is feminism. It's not liberalism. He likes liberalism. The problem is feminism. Okay, now that's a different position than what you're going to find in Harrington and Lasch. And both of the positions held by Harrington and Lasch are different. So, as he said, Harrington is a reactionary. Okay, and I say that with a twinkle in my eye because, is it true? Is she a reactionary? Well, she's going to be called one, and so she'll happily just take on the name to get out ahead of that. Yeah, but she also says that we need to go back to the 1450s in terms of how the sexual roles are related. She says, not the 1950s. We need to go back to the 1450s. What that means is actually beautiful and wholesome and awesome, and would require reading some sections from the end of her book, Feminism Against Progress. All right? So Feminism Against Progress is one of these books. And I'll be doing an exegetical or two on this text with Alex Sappington sometime in the next few days. You will be invited, but I can't tell you when it will be because I'm just trying to make it work to his schedule. Lasch's Haven in a Heartless World is a bit different. And one of the reasons it's a bit different is because he's writing it to a different audience in a different time. The bourgeois family became something very different from traditional families. And feminism comes as a reaction or antithesis to that bourgeois family. That bourgeois family is this idea of private of private life that is a reprieve from the public world of work. It's where a man who's the main breadwinner gets his consolation from that heavily competitive world that he spends the rest of his time in. It's a small consolation, but it's a precious consolation. This idea of the haven, I think when people hear haven in a heartless world, they think, oh, Christopher Lasch thinks that the family should be this haven in a heartless world. Well, Christopher Lasch is not a reactionary. He's a socialist. So from Lasch's position, it's actually a problem that the family has become a haven in a heartless world. It's a problem that the bourgeois world requires that we have this, and that it reduces the family to the nuclear family, right? Yet at the same time, he's not going to do the thing that radicals of his time were doing. So conservatives, they were raising the alarm bells. Oh no, the family, it's in crisis, it's in crisis. And then the radicals were like, that's right, it's in crisis. Accelerate the abolition of the family, accelerate it. And let's get the woman out of the household entirely. Well, it was already bad enough that men had to learn to spend their entire lives working for the man. Now, all of a sudden, the woman also has to do that. It's a bad situation for everybody. Unless, of course, you're one of those extremely marginal people who traditionally would have been a monk or a nun or a priest, for whom family life is not a calling, right? All right, so I've put these up here so that I would say what I just said. I was going to say what I just said later, but I decided to just go ahead and say it right now. But with that said, I will probably come back to the themes of these texts and invite you all to join me in the reading of certain portions of these texts.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
It's called Everything Should Have Its Place, and then we can learn to put things away with Socrates. Philosophy, and I just wrote this right before we started our call. Galen came in as I was writing the last sentence of it. Philosophy as a way of life means thinking about what you do. That doesn't mean always thinking about what you are doing as you are doing it, of course. We have to compartmentalize to some extent and, in solitude, reflect on our actions retroactively. This is when we can assess the behaviors we call habits and form judgments about whether they are good, fine, or need improvement. Too often, this work has been outsourced to self-help books, gurus, or therapists, all of which are potentially helpful in certain limited cases, so long as we do not become reliant on outsourcing the work of subjectivity itself. The work of subjectivity is the work of reflection, judgment, and adaptation that should, in the first instance, always be the primary work of every person's life. This is the space opened up by the conversation with me and myself that Hannah Arendt describes as the basis of moral thinking, which, in her Responsibility and Judgment, she describes as being something constantly under the threat of erasure by a society of institutional control. And now I'm wondering if, Sai, it would be easy for you to read the quotes from this as we go along, or if that'll be difficult. If it's difficult, no problem. Yeah, it's like he's running around. I'm not sure he'll be able to. Yeah, can you?
I'm here. Sorry. What did you say? I'll read this here? Sure.
Yeah, could you read?
Yes. And do. The presupposition of such judgment is merely the habit of living together, explicitly with oneself, that is, of being engaged in that silent dialogue between me and myself, which since Socrates and Plato, we usually call thinking. Conscience is the anticipation of the fellow who awaits you if and when you come home. Thinking and intercourse between me and myself is the condition of possibility of the fear of bad conscience. And it is this fear, not thinking as such, that impels man to abstain from doing wrong. Could the activity of thinking as such, the habit of examining and reflecting upon whatever happens to come to pass, regardless of specific content, and quite independent of results, could this activity be of such a nature that it conditions men against doing evil?
Thank you. Yet whenever it comes to thinking about, and I'll just say about that, yeah, thinking is not just thinking for Hannah Arendt. When she's talking about thinking, she's not just talking about you're sitting outside and you're thinking about how you need to do this and you need to do that and you should have said this and you should have said that and what is this person gonna, what maybe you should call this person, like all of this stuff that just kind of just like I kind of think of it as like the screensaver of thought. It's a different thing than thinking in Hannah Arendt's sense. It's this thing that she has lifted to this much more noble level that requires a lot of discernment, a lot of reflection, and also it requires genuine solitude. And you have, it's a process of writing and reflecting. So she's talking about it as the condition of moral life itself. Yet whenever it comes to thinking about the basic needs, functions, habits, and flow of life, I find myself running into people who are still convinced of this outdated and ridiculous division of labor between serious philosophy and self-help. They roll their eyes and scoff, or if they can help themselves, they nod politely or blink listlessly. Academic philosophers have a foolish tendency to scorn this thoughtfulness about human activity as mere self-help. Yet if we look at the founders of philosophy, there was no separation between metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, religion, and the virtuous kind of conversation had between truth seekers about ways of living better. We can see how philosophy without this dimension becomes detached from practical life and eventually secludes its participants into the back offices and dingy basements of the screened society. Yet even before the domination of screens and its societies of the spectacle, Nietzsche was already, while vigorously hiking the Alps, warning us to not trust thoughts which issue from stale air.
Remain seated as little as possible. Put no trust in any thought that is not born in the open, to the accompaniment of free bodily motion, nor in one in which even the muscles do not celebrate a feast. All prejudices take their origin in the intestines. A sedentary life, as I have already said elsewhere, is the real sin against the Holy Spirit.
The screened society makes the capture of intellectually inclined individuals more easy than ever. Abstract thinkers already inhabited virtual worlds. They were, as Ivan Illich would say, in a state of disablement.
I propose that we name the mid-20th century the age of disabling professions, an age when people had problems, experts had solutions, and scientists measured imponderables such as abilities and needs. The age of professions will be remembered as the time when politics withered, when voters, guided by professors, entrusted to technocrats the power to legislate needs, renounced the authority to decide who needs what, and suffered monopolistic oligarchies to determine the means by which these needs shall be met.
Thank you. This is not about those intellectuals versus us practical people. I am one of those intellectuals captured by the screen society. I am also a practical person. I am both. And by being both, I have become, in some strange new sense, neither. But insofar as I am one of those poor, helpless intellectuals incapable of changing his own oil or washing dishes after dinner, I speak on our behalf. Helped by all the rest of society, we become incapable of helping ourselves. When taken to an extreme, we are like the analytic philosopher Saul Kripke, who, nasty rumors have it, needed help just to urinate. They say it was the autism that made this so. And honestly, I don't believe the anecdote is anything more than an urban legend, but it is getting at something. What analytic philosopher have you ever met who is capable of really doing much for himself? If they dress well, too well. Analytic philosophy is, in a sense, the division of labor objectified in a professorial position. It is the occupation of a person who believes everything functions in accordance with logic. All have their own place, and the role of philosophy is the mere handmaiden of the sciences, as in humble conceptual analysis devoid of historical context of social significance. Forgive me for being unfair to those amazing exceptions who prove the rules towards which I am hastily gesturing on my way to the main point of this piece. The baby in the analytic tradition is that order is indeed important, that things do have their proper place. This brings us back to the topic of reflecting on our actions, judging whether our behaviors have been good and whether we might need to adapt our habits to new information. For anyone who has ever lived in a messy home, you already know that the peace of solitude is a hard-won privilege. How can we really reflect on our lives when the spaces within which we would do such reflection are themselves out of order? For anyone coming from a background of dysfunction or poverty, you likely know more than anyone else that one of the most philosophically challenging questions of all pertaining to the good life is, as Booker T. Washington asks, where is the broom?
Think of the time lost in the average family looking for the broom when the time comes to sweep the floor. At this time, all business suspends. Mother cries out first, "Where's the broom?" The older sister cries to John and Susie and Jane, "Where is the broom?" And that kind of thing goes on every day in the week and year. It takes the average family from 10 to 12 minutes every day to find the
broom. Yep, thank you. Teaching at Black schools across the U.S. and attempting to teach his teachers in training at Tuskegee to be the best they could be, Washington talked at length about the importance of teaching one's students that things, like the broom, have their proper place. If the broom has yet to be designated a proper place, then finding a fitting location becomes the utmost priority. Why did Black teachers, many of whom were recently freed slaves, need to be taught to teach this to their students? Because, surprise, surprise, they are human beings. As human beings, we do not magically have knowledge of where the broom goes. As human beings, we don't have instincts for almost any of the stuff of what we call life. One significant difference between Black Americans and white ones at the time was that, as recently liberated, they were having to teach themselves to do the things that had been formerly institutionalized. An institution is, in the most simple sense, a body of knowledge practices that help human beings intergenerationally reproduce a form of life that is directed towards or in service of some end. So there's a definition of institution from me anyways. And I do believe that this is one that Weber and Bourdieu and the like would probably sign off on them. I think so. I'd have to think a bit deeper about that. To be liberated from the institution you were dependent upon and which was dependent upon you or people in your position means that you now have to teach yourself those things that were a part of the background knowledge of that institution. Liberated humans have to relearn how to reproduce life, or that liberation becomes poverty and ignorance. This is one of the many reasons I disdain the elite PMC scorn towards all things self-help. People who engage in this anti-philosophical discourse reveal their ignorance that is based in a form of privilege that is itself disablement. It is the kind of discourse that is downstream from a mode of life based in a social position embedded in the relations of production that doesn't have to clean up after itself, or that takes for granted the knowledge practices of its institutions and class that made these feel obvious and second nature. You hear it when people say, oh, self-help is just like, it's just stuff your dad tells you. Well, bitch, most people don't have a dad to tell them how to do things. Like literally. That's the whole point of the working class. 5 billion people on this planet do not get to have those conversations with their dad. So when a person says that shit, it just makes me want to punch them in the face. Okay, that's my black bile humor coming out. Maybe a little disproportionate, but yeah, it really gets me going. We are a different breed of philosophers, we thinking doers. We have to learn to assign the broom to its proper place, communicate about this with those with whom we live, and then concert our efforts to develop the habits necessary to performatively render true that assignment. Cleaning, organizing, and performing the basic tasks of self-care can be deeply philosophical. Insofar as mindful behavior helps us develop stewardship, it helps us free ourselves from our disablement by the commodity form. Neither producers nor consumers simply, we are whole human beings who take ownership in our lives and care for ourselves, our loved ones, and those things that, if not used mindfully and tended to in such a way as to make useful when needed otherwise, threaten to dominate us. This theme of stewardship as right ownership is about more than just surviving in a messed up world. It is about power. It is about wisdom. It is about the good life. Though when thinking of mindful daily activities, we tend to think of Zen monks making tea or sweeping. The fact is that no one person's voice resonates through the ages more powerfully on this than of Socrates himself. In Xenophon's Socratic discourse, the Oikonomicus, Socrates tells a young man about a conversation he had with a gentleman about the conversation he had with his wife when they were settling into a working domestic relationship. Quote, "There is nothing, woman, so useful or fine for human beings as order." This section is fun and funny, and at the same time somehow both powerful and wholesome. Socrates says the gentleman, whose name was Ischomachus, told his wife a bunch of analogies to convey the truth of the inherent goodness of order. First, we have order in music.
A chorus consists of human beings. When each acts in a chance way, a confusion appears that is unlovely, even to look at. But when they act and speak in an ordered manner, the same ones seem worth looking at and worth hearing as well.
Order in military.
A disordered army is a thing of the greatest confusion, the easiest prey for its enemies, and for its friends, a most inglorious and useless sight. Mules, heavy-armed soldiers, baggage carriers, light-armed soldiers, horsemen, and wagons, all together. For how could they march if they were constantly getting in one another's way? An ordered army, on the other hand, is the finest sight for friends and the most appalling for enemies. What friend wouldn't look with pleasure on a large number of heavy-armed soldiers marching in order, or wonder at the horsemen riding in ordered groups? What enemy wouldn't be terrified by the sight of heavy-armed soldiers, horsemen, targeteers, archers, and slingers, all distinctly arranged and following their rulers in an orderly way?
Order at sea.
I saw there a very great number of implements divided within a rather small space. Everything is kept in such a way that nothing obstructs anything else or requires anyone to search for it, or is so inaccessible or so difficult to remove as to cause a delay when needed for some sudden use.
Socrates says that Ischomachus's wife, by the way, Anne, I saw you just joined from the computer. We'll be getting into the reading of the actual book here in a second. Socrates says that Ischomachus's wife was eager to hear these stories. She was not embarrassed, for she also desired to have a clean house. Human beings always want to live in clean conditions, but the development of the knowledge practices requires conversation, education, reflection, and practice. Otherwise, we wouldn't need Socrates, and the students at Tuskegee would not have needed Booker T. Washington. Having shared all these wonderful analogies to his wife, Ischomachus goes on.
Having observed, then, the accuracy in this arrangement, I said to my wife that we would be very slack indeed if those in ships, which, after all, are rather small, find places for their things and preserve the order among them, even when they are roughly tossed about, and are able even in moments of panic to find what is needed, whereas we, who have large and distinct storerooms in our house for each kind of thing, and indeed have a house on solid ground, cannot find a fine place for each of our things where they may readily be found. How could this be anything but the greatest unintelligence on our part?
It cuts you off on the last word for some reason.
How could this be anything but the greatest unintelligence on our part?
Thank you. I share these quotes in full because they bring joy to my heart and, I suspect, nourishment that shall enrich all of our relationships. These words retain their power, even through translation and the reaches of millennia.
But how fine it looks, too, when shoes of any kind are set out in a regular manner. It is fine to see clothes of any kind, when they are sorted, as also bed covers, bronze kettles, and things pertaining to the table, and what of all things would be most ridiculed, not indeed by the solemn man, but by the wit. Even pots have a graceful look when distinctly arranged. Indeed, all other things look somehow finer when they are kept in order.
We must thank Ischomachus through Socrates, through Xenophon, for relaying this conversation, and indeed, Ischomachus' wife for being such an encouraging learner. Household management is, as Socrates argues, a form of art like any other skill. It is the most immediate, primordial, and essential for doing all other things. It requires thought and care. Without deep thought and care about how we manage our most basic affairs and care for ourselves and others in our lives, we become slaves of our appetites and tools, mere pawns in the game of alienated and alienating production and consumption that leaves us perpetually and incessantly in a state of disablement. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the post that I'm going to send out with this video tomorrow, which is the reading of books 8 and 9 of the Oikonomicus that I did with Anne and my mom this morning. And it was a really good time. And so that's going to go up on the channel. I hope that you'll find the time to listen to it. It'll be public for everyone. And yeah, it's just called Put Things Where They Belong with Socrates. But then this obviously is all additional stuff that I wrote out this morning or this afternoon. It was supposed to be a really short post, but it turned into a full-on thing. All right, take care, Galen. Now, I was just going to have you read. We're going to get into, section 8. So, Anne, are you handy? Sorry, not section 8. Section 9, book 9 of the Oikonomicus. Yeah, she's still doing things. So, I would say let's just do like a 2 to 3 paragraph pass back and forth here, Sai. And I say 2 or 3 because some paragraphs are very long, so we can kind of just, see. But it's like the 2
am I unmuted now?
There you are. Hi.
Oh, sorry. I'm like in a Zoom call, then also joined from my phone, and so it's giving me issues. Yeah, I'm currently opening up our new mattress, so I'm very much in it right now, if that's okay. But if you really need me to read, I can find a stopping point.
As long as you give us the woman pass, just to say woman a lot,
You guys have my full permission to say woman So there you go.
Okay. Thank you. We in the episode that's going up tomorrow, we told my mom that I've been saying "by Zeus, woman" to Anne like all the time. And she laughs every time. And we keep joking about making a shirt that says it. You know, we could do like a whole clothing line. Anyway, I'll kick it off. What then, Ischomachus? I said. Did your wife seem to listen at all to what you were trying to so seriously to teach her? What else did she do, if not promise to be diligent, manifest her very great pleasure, as though she had found some easy means out of a difficulty, and asked me to order things separately as quickly as possible in the way I had stated? How then, Ischomachus, I said, did you separately order them for her? What else seemed best to me, if not to show her first the capacity of the house? For it is not adorned with decorations, Socrates. The rooms were planned and built. Daisy, lay down. Sorry, she's pacing. It's driving me crazy. For it is not adorned with decorations, Socrates. The rooms were planned and built simply with a view to their being the most advantageous receptacles for the things that would be in them, so that each calls for what is suitable to it. The bedroom, being in an interior part of the house, invites the most valuable bed covers and implements. The dry parts of the dwelling, the grain. The cool places, the wine. The well-lighted places, the works and implements that need light. And I displayed to her the areas for the daily use of human beings, furnished so as to be cool in summer and warm in winter. And I displayed to her the house as a whole, and how it lies open to the south, obviously, so as to be well exposed to the sun in winter and well shaded in summer. I want to highlight, by the way, how much pre-electricity a mansion, even, I'm guessing, like compared to your average household, this was like a mansion, how much its organization was dictated by the climate and the seasons, right? Prior to electricity and HVAC and everything like that, it's like, yeah, no, it's very important that everything have its place. Oh, we have a refrigerator now, so we can just have that in any old room. We don't have to have a cool place in the house, etc. So obviously, none of this transplants perfectly to our current conditions, but it's the thought and the care and the fact that there are reasons for things, and that these reasons are never known by anyone else unless you talk about them. We should never, especially in the post-class fractured mass, in the age of the stultification of Timenergy, we should never assume that other people know things. Never. It's always worth acting like you're starting from square one. Unless the person's like, okay, I get it. I need to get on with what I'm doing. In which case, okay, fair, fine. Then I pointed out to her the women's apartments, separated from the men's by a bolted door, so that nothing may be taken out that shouldn't be, and so that the servants may not produce offspring without our knowledge. This is probably the part that we thought was the funniest. These are the kinds of things we don't have to think about. You see, our servants or slaves are machines. We don't have to worry about them reproducing without our knowledge, right? So we also are our servants and our slaves in a way that none of these guys ever would have been, right? We do everything. And so our situation is a lot more juggling than what they had to deal with. For the useful ones, for the most part, feel even more goodwill. So the useful servants, that is, for the most part, feel even more goodwill once they have had children. But when wicked ones are paired together, they become only more resourceful in their bad behavior. When we had gone through these things, he said, we then proceeded to separate our belongings according to tribes. We began first, he said, by collecting. I want to point out really quick, he's basically talking about breeding servants here. And people who think about genetics would if you're thinking about breeding servants or slaves, obviously you're going to be thinking, well, we don't want the bad parents having bad offspring because they're thinking in terms of genetics. That's not even on their mind at all. What he's pointing out here is parents. One of the things that makes them different from single or childless people is that it basically intensifies the way that they already are. People who are already like good at doing good and trying to be good, who have children, are going to try to be more virtuous, like intensely, like more intensely. But if you've got like a couple of people who are out stealing stuff and doing meth, and then they have kids, the point is like now they become even better thieves and meth heads, right? We lived next to a couple of them, so we've had experiences with this. Mama Bear can be a meth head. Anyway. After this, we distinguished the woman's ornaments for festivals, the man's dress for festivals in war, and bed covers for the women's apartments, bed covers for the men's apartments, shoes for women, shoes for men. Another tribe consisted of arms, another of instruments for spinning, another of instruments for bread making, another of instruments for cooking, another of the things for bathing, another of the things for kneading bread, another of the things for the table. And all these things were further divided according to whether they were used every day or only for festivals. We also set apart the expenses for each month from the amount that had been calculated and reserved for the whole year. For in this way, we could better see how things would come out at the end. Daisy lay down. And when we had sorted out our belongings according to tribes, we took each kind of thing to its appropriate place. After this, as to the by the way, I'm totally going to do that with my kids. We're not going to talk about things belonging to a set or a class or a species. We're going to call them tribes. After this, as to the implements, the servants use from day to day, those for the making of bread, for cooking, for spinning, and others of the sort, we pointed out to those who would be using them where each must go, handed them over, and gave orders that they be kept secure. Those we use for festivals, Daisy lay down. For entertaining foreigners, or only from time to time, we handed over to the housekeeper, and after pointing out to her their places and counting and making lists of the various kinds of things, we told her to give each what he needed of them, to remember what she had given someone, and when she had got it back, to return it to the place she had taken it from. I'm just going to have you take it from here, Sai, since this is like a run-on paragraph. It's never going to end.
No problem. We chose as housekeeper the one who would, upon examination, seemed to us the most self-controlled as regards food, wine, sleep, and intercourse with men, and who, in addition, seemed to have a good memory, and the forethought to avoid punishment for negligence, and to consider how, by gratifying us in some way, she might be honored by us in return. We taught her also to feel good will towards us, sharing our delights when we were delighted in some way, and when there was something painful, inviting her aid. We further educated, her to be eager to increase the household, making her thoroughly acquainted with it and giving her a share in its prosperity. And we inspired justice in her, honoring the just more than the unjust, and displaying to her that they live richer and freer lives than the unjust. We then installed her in the place. But in addition to all these things, Socrates, he said, I told my wife that there would be no benefit in any of this unless she herself was diligent in seeing that the order is preserved in each thing. I taught her that in the cities subject to good laws and citizens, the citizens do not think it enough merely to have fine laws, but in addition choose guardians of the laws to examine them, to praise the one who acts lawfully, and to punish the one who acts contrary to the laws. You take over for me, Dave.
Then he said, I suggested that my wife consider herself a guardian of the laws regarding the things in the house, that she inspect the implements whenever it seems best to her, just as a garrison commander inspects his guards, that she tests the fitness of each thing, just as the council tests the fitness of horses and horsemen, and that, like a queen, she praise and honor the deserving to the limit of her capacity, and rebuke and punish the one who needs such things. In addition, he said, I taught her that she could not be justly annoyed if I gave her many more orders in regard to our possessions than I gave to the servants, displaying to her that the servants share in their master's wealth only to the extent that they carry it, attend to it, or guard it, and that no one of them is allowed to use it unless the Lord gives it to him, whereas everything is the master's to use as he wishes. To the one deriving the great, I really like this as a sort of definition of sorts. To the one deriving the greatest benefit from its preservation and the greatest harm from its destruction belongs the greatest concern for a thing. This I declared to her. What then, I said, after your wife had heard these things, Ischomachus, did she at all obey you?
I could take over. What else did she do? He said. If not, tell me I didn't understand her correctly. If I suppose that in teaching her to be concerned with our substance, I had ordered her to do something hard. For as she told me, he said, it would have been much harder if I had ordered her to neglect her own things than if she were required to concern herself with the goods of the household. For just as it seemed natural, he said, for a sensible woman to be concerned for her offspring rather than to neglect them, so, she said, it's more pleasant for a sensible woman to be concerned for those of the possessions that delight her, because they are her own, than to neglect them.
Thank you, Sai. Great job. So, does anyone have any immediate thoughts? I want to have a little discussion, perhaps. I'm interested in hearing Anne or Kier's thoughts, Jared as well. And I know that this is kind of rehashing stuff that we went over earlier today, but yeah, no one else was there for any of that stuff.
Yeah, I was going to bring up how I like, and I think something that we were all talking about and something that like your mom and I especially have in common is just a resistance and a struggle with the organization and the maintenance. It's like hypothetically, I like housework. I like the idea of it. I like this philosophy of stewardship. But it's become like in my head, like this forever daunting chore and task versus, right ownership and right stewardship of your belongings and your living space. And so, like when he tells his wife, here's what needs to happen. And she's like, oh yeah, that sounds way easier than just neglecting everything. It's like, I just that attitude towards it is refreshing versus feeling like, oh, it's such a chore, oh, it's such a drag, oh, it's such a pain. Yeah, we kind of talked about that this morning.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. If I can just jump in, what I've thought about is in relation to, like, I live in a town that's like run by landlords, and they're constantly complaining about the students that live here. It's a college town, not taking care of their property. But obviously that's in relation to the fact that they're not in right relation with the place that they live under this arrangement. They can't assume a position of care or stewardship for several reasons. Obviously, there's if anybody has been preyed on by landlords, oftentimes your deposit is stolen for things that you didn't do or whatever. So it sort of disincentivizes people to even care about taking care of their apartments or whatever. And then, you can't make permanent changes. And I've noticed, as I was pretty much a lifelong renter and now a first-time homeowner, it changes your whole worldview when you can actually change and make permanent improvements to the place you live in. So anyway, that's just a thing I've been thinking about as I've read this.
Yeah, I really relate to that. Like, um, since I'm living in a permanent place now, just like how, I don't know, just yeah, how much it is disincentivized to take care of a place when you're a renter, and particularly where I live, like the housing market's been so crazy that like, and this probably happens everywhere, but like landlords, I don't know, it's like an investment, and so they don't even like care about like the people that are currently living there or the state of the house. Like they're planning to sell it to a developer who's going to turn it, like completely tear it down. And so it's really like there's just like a helplessness, and it's so discouraging like living in a situation like that. And I think like it's actually taken me like a lot of years to get out of that mindset. Many
Hmm.
years past, like when I'm actually living in a place that I do have like a long-term relationship with, to actually like stop feeling helpless and like totally overwhelmed, and like how like just the feeling of like just how unskilled I am at like fixing these various things that need fixing, and like but also how amazing it feels like to learn you know what may be really basic to someone else, but that I've never done before and I don't know how to do, and I don't have any type of mechanical background at all. So there's something like really also just like deeply satisfying about caring for a place and caring for the things in it. And I think it's like in some ways even creates some distance between me and people that are in these like horrible rental situations, because it's like if I'm like so excited about wallpaper and like the like kind of like the incredible invention and innovation that it is, that this like paper has to have these various qualities and like be able to stretch but not tear, and like all of this stuff, like yeah, some people look at you like either like you're crazy or like you're the most boring person they've ever met.
Yeah, this is what I'm getting at with when I said that liberated people need this kind of stuff. And I guess, yeah, if you live in a society that has institutionalized self-empowerment and a sort of distribution of labor, and a lot of the self-care is just it's just part of the embodied practices and habitus of your class, that would be one thing. But when you're coming from a life of dysfunction and poverty and renting and wage labor, you do not have the ability to make the most of your space or to clean up after yourself. It's not a simple matter of putting the thing away afterwards. When you get mad at your roommate for not doing that, which by the way, lifelong struggle, getting mad at roommates for, these kinds of things. And then of course, getting in trouble for being messy myself. It's just like this constant vicious cycle that all of us working people learn about firsthand. It's not just, oh, just do it. There is no such thing as just do it. In order to do it in a sustained way, to where it becomes a part of your background practices, and it's no longer like doing chores or working at a job, in order for it to become as natural as wiping your own ass or washing your armpits in the shower, like the kinds of things that I think most of us at this point take for granted, hopefully. Um, these are, those are things that also were chores. Those are things that also were chores before they became second nature. And so what we're talking about is the development of, of our ability to expand the circle of our second nature, right? That's what the philosophy of stewardship is about to me, is expanding the circle of second nature. What is being made second nature to you? If all of the cleaning things throughout the house, if tidying up here and there throughout the house all feels like chores still, you're still living in this compartmentalized reality. You don't feel like it's a chore to brush your teeth. Probably not. I'm guessing not. Some of us, maybe. Like there are days, of course, where it's like last minute, I'm like, oh, I have to brush my teeth. I'm like laying in bed. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have laid down before I did that. But no, most of the time it's very second nature. And so, how do you go from something feeling like a chore to something feeling second nature? And how do you, on the process to that point, make it pleasurable, fun, perhaps even? Yeah, Anne, take it away.
Yeah, well, I think the term that you brought up this morning in our conversation with your mom and me was habitus. Like speaking specifically about someone in our life who, like at the end of the day, when it comes 5 o'clock, all they want to do is relax, even though their lifestyle is more self-employed as opposed to having to work a 9 to 5 job. But that's because their whole life they were in the habitus of a worker. You leave in the morning, you come home at 5, 6, 7, 8 after a long day, and you're done. You clock out of work versus when you're, say, self-employed or you run your own business, or like for us, you have the farm. That is the lifestyle. But if your habitus is still that of a worker, like come 5 o'clock, you want to detach from work. And so I feel like habitus and field analysis is really important in here in trying to think about like how do we build different habitat? How do we shape our habitus around our living space, and how do we change that even if we are like tired at the end of the day from work?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, like for people, and this was also me for a long time. It's like with the clocking in and clocking out, when you have like no control or very little control, or someone else have arbitrary control over you during your work hours, then yeah, once you get off work, you're like, I'm like, no one can tell me what to do, like, and I'm not gonna do anything. It's kind of like what do they call it, like revenge bedtime procrastination or something, like just staying up like to your own detriment because you're trying to like steal time back. But I think like there is something that like sets you up for resentment in that orientation, where you have like this really strict line between like work and not work. And I think that's part of why I love reading Mary Harrington's take about like, this 1950s like trad idea of like a woman in the kitchen and a man at work. Like that is not very old at all. And actually what men and women, people living together, did for a very, very long time is they worked together in and around the home. And the division of labor was likely very practical. Oh, you're stronger, so you do this part. I'm more detail oriented, so I will take care of this. Um, and I think, yeah, just like I'm in the suburbs, but I'm still trying to kind of have that like homesteading mentality where there isn't such a clear line. And so then I can like, if not enjoy cleaning the kitchen, at least it can just be this like neutral thing. It's just like a thing that I do. It's part of my day. Maybe I can visit during it or read or listen to something or not. And at least try and not feel like something's being stolen from me, and to recognize like that doing that is going to make it so much easier for us to cook tomorrow, and it's going to be so much more relaxing to wake up to that. And that it's kind of like a gift to your future self to care for your place.
Hmm. And it's interesting that both self-help and self-care in the consumer demographics that form around these things tend to feel a little bit more masculine versus feminine coded, even though, of course, it's often, you still have women who are doing self-help, Mel Robbins, for instance, and you obviously still have men who are doing all this stuff about self-care, but self-help and self-care become buzzwords. Everything that I said in my black bile mode of just utter exasperation with people who are so anti-self-help, doesn't really touch on the fact that there's a good reason to be super put off by these discourses, by self-help and by self-care. Buzzwordy things are annoying inherently, especially when they become the be-all end-all of a person's mode that, hey, well, all of these things that you don't like about our current state of reality, it comes down to you just not understanding basic self-help things, or you just not taking the time. So someone's like, oh yeah, you've got this critique. Well, maybe you should take a bubble bath. Oh, thank you. Right? But the philosophy of stewardship as wholesome theory meant to be taken in tandem with critical theory. So you're not doing these things separately, but bringing together the whole picture, I think, is about sort of unifying the baby in the bathwater here of both self-help and self-care. And anyway, with all that said, I'm really glad you brought it back to Harrington here, Kira, because what I wanted to do was a little bit more of the reading. And I'm not doing a proper lecture on Lasch or Harrington right now. What I wanted to do is treat this a little bit more like a seminar, and it's like the way that I see the seminar as opposed to a normal lecture course, especially an introductory one, is that it's a lot more of a thing that we're doing together. You're all working on vision boards. You're thinking about cultivation and construction. You're thinking about what your project is going to be. I'm excited to hear you share about that. There's all these different little things that are going to relate to these texts. And before we get out of here, I want to talk about the big innovation that has changed my life thanks to IKEA. Praise be IKEA. It's such a no-brainer. So I ask you to not let me forget to bring it back to that. But right now I want to take it to these two texts. And so we're not going to do like a lecture on these. What I'm going to do is ask you all to just with me, we'll read from a few sections of these texts, and then I'll be inviting you to join me and other people who will be reading various portions of these texts throughout the rest of this month. And then also, if you're not able to come to those, or you would like to have a smaller group and do it on your own, organize something on the public forum of the Discord. It's easy to just create a post that says, on Tuesday at this time, I'm going to do something, and you're welcome to join and read with me. And then, sometimes somebody will join with you, other times you'll do it alone. And pretty much everybody who does exegeticals at Theory Underground ends up doing them alone, and that's totally cool and okay. But yeah, I'll be doing one with Alex Sappington. I'm down to do one with every one of you. And so, and also, if you don't want to be looking at a screen, you can get a physical copy of it and then, read from the physical copy, and then I'll do the moving the PDF page thing. Okay, but with all of that said, Haven in a Heartless World by Christopher Lasch has a subtitle, The Family Besieged. And he is also known most famously for his work, The Culture of Narcissism. When I think of the post-left, or of the left critique of the left, or of people who were really put out by the new left or certain aspects of the new left in the 1960s and 70s. And when I think of the people who come from that disenfranchisement, from that sort of exasperation, I think of Christopher Lasch as almost the godfather. I really think, if there was a book called The Post-Left Reader, even though Christopher Lasch is not post-left, he is a socialist. it is still nonetheless true that he is an absolute prerequisite in order to think deeper about these things, because nobody really devoted their life to it as much as he did. And I always say, but he was still a leftist or whatever. And I say that specifically because, we're also reading someone who identifies as a reactionary. And I like to be based in both pilled. So it's like, I in my attempt to be neither nor left or right, I also at the same time want to read of both left and right. And I think that there are people who really steel man certain positions. And so when I'm thinking of like who's like one of the most based leftists or socialists, right? It's going to be Christopher Lasch. And the thing is sadly he was only really picked up by the right in the 80s and 90s. So, Lasch has had more of a direct impact on Tucker Carlson than he has had on anybody else on the left, right? So it's part of Tucker Carlson's pedigree, his ability to speak in a way that is sort of straddling some interesting position that is neither elitist nor populist, but is kind of doing something a little different. Well, he gets that from Lasch. And, I'm not trying to promote Carlson, even though he's one of the most obviously influential personalities in the media sphere today. I'm not trying to promote him. I'm trying to say he gets something in his arsenal that works for him from Lasch. And I think that it's sad that it's the right that ended up benefiting from Lasch, because Lasch supplies them with the means for doing a really powerful critique of especially Democrats, but also of leftists, DSA leftists today. And so with all of that said, I would say it's just because people don't like to do self-critique, especially when it's going to be weaponized against them, especially when it does and has been weaponized against them. But that's maybe all the more reason why it's needed now more than ever, right? So with all of that said, we're thinking about the family, and we're thinking about ourselves as products of a broken system, of broken homes, of wage labor and its habitus, of lifestyle renters who haven't learned how to be good stewards of their homes yet. We're all trying to take ownership, right? Well, there's a problem, and that is that we also are the products of families, and family is what is besieged in the modern world. And so we'll start with, oh shit, do we have is this the same? Let's see if this is does this do what I want it to do? I'm not sure if I want to read from the introduction or chapter. I think I want to read from chapter 1. Yes, okay. It's chapter 1, not the introduction. The introduction is really great too. I hope that you'll read it on your own or with other people later. But for now, let's just dive right into chapter 1. We were talking earlier when reading Xenophon about the importance of actually letting these authors speak for themselves. In academia, you get specialists who are supposed to have done the reading. In many cases, they used to. And that gives them a sort of authority. But there is no authority more powerful than the authority of the actual voices that we wish to keep alive, and those that in particular still speak to us today. And so here we go. Christopher Lasch. Chapter 1 is called Social Pathologists and the Socialization of Reproduction. And it says, the making of the modern family. As the chief agency of socialization, the family reproduces cultural patterns in the individual. It not only imparts ethical norms, providing the child with his first instruction in the prevailing social rules, it profoundly shapes his character in ways of which he is not even aware. The family instills modes of thought and action that become habitual. Because of its enormous emotional influence, it colors all of a child's subsequent experience. Sai, if you want to take it for a few.
Do one more paragraph and then we'll take.
Okay. The union of love and discipline in the same persons, mother and father, creates a highly charged environment in which the child learns lessons he will never get over, not necessarily the explicit lessons his parents wish him to master. He develops an unconscious predisposition to act in certain ways and to recreate in later life, in his relations with lovers and authorities, his earliest experiences. Parents first embody love and power, and each of their actions conveys to the child, quite independently of their overt intentions, the injunctions and constraints by means of which society attempts to organize experience. If the reproduction of culture were simply a matter of formal instruction and discipline, it could be left to the schools. But it also requires that culture be embedded in personality. Socialization makes the individual want to do what he has to do. The family is the agency to which society entrusts this complex and delicate task. And before we go into the next part there, Sai, I'm just going to say real quick, I want to highlight, he said, the union of love and discipline in the same persons, mother and father, creates a highly charged environment in which the child learns lessons he will never get over. This is a really interesting, if you really zoom it out, sort of gender archetype, right? The mother is the one who brings love to the table. The father is the one who brings discipline. If you were to sit here and talk to Christopher Lasch, of course, he's going to do all the caveating that would make people happy today. He would do all the signposting. He would say, of course, it's going to be true that in some cases, it's the father who's much more loving and it's the mother who's much more about discipline. And in all cases, it's probably going to be something a lot more like 70-30. But he did not live in this crazy post-hystericized, sterilized PMC HR culture, Tumblr world. And so he is actually capable of speaking in generalities and knowing that you are smarter than to think that he really means it so cut and dry. And so I have to embellish it all because I think that some of our listeners in the future might be like, oh, wow, okay. But I also think that there's something deep about that the mother archetype brings love and that the father archetype brings discipline. And this is not just something that he made up. He is heavily based in Freud. And so he is drawing on the traditional Oedipal triangle. That is what he is doing here. And, he's going to do his own thing with Freud. But yeah, this is where he's coming from. And so with that said, yeah, obviously, I think we all have this sense that socialization in the home has a lot to do with how you're going to be outside of the home. And so that's all obvious, right? But the part that I really want to highlight here is that it's not just the explicit lessons. The things that a child learns that are the most important are not taught through words. If they were, schools could take over those functions. That's what he says, right? So schools could do everything that parents do if it was just something about what is said, the explicit lesson. But there's an implicit thing about relationships and navigating relationships that is so much more important that you cannot get in a classroom or in some large institution. That's what he just said. And that's based. And I love it. So, all right, take it away, Sai.
Great. Yeah. Of all institutions, the family is the most resistant to change. Given its importance, however, changes in its size and structure and its emotional organization and its relations with the outside world must have enormous impact on the development of personality. Changes in character, structure, in turn, accompany or underlie changes in economic and political life. The development of capitalism and the rise of the state reverberate in the individual's inner being. Ever since Max Weber showed the connection between Protestantism and capitalism and demonstrated, moreover, that the connections lay at the level not of formal religious doctrine, but of psychological sanctions, it has been clear that modern civilization requires, among other things, a profound transformation of personality. The Protestant concept of the calling not only dignified worldly life, insisted on the moral value of work, and legitimized prudent calculation and provision for the future, it also upheld the spiritual dignity of marriage and domesticity. The repudiation of the monastic virtues of poverty and chastity, the upgrading of marriage, and the emergence of a new concept of marriage based on prudence and foresight went hand in hand with the new value attached to capital accumulation. The bourgeois mind conceived of children as hostages to the future and devoted an unprecedented amount of attention to their upbringing. The new style of domestic life created psychological conditions favorable to the emergence of a new type of inner-directed, self-reliant personality. The family's deepest contribution to the needs of a market society based on competition, individualism, postponement of gratification, rational foresight, and the accumulation of worldly goods.
I want to highlight the word unprecedented because Anne is going to be giving tomorrow her, we don't want to call it a book report, of the of that book, Family Unfriendly. And then I also think of Catherine Liu's book, Virtue Hoarders. Both Liu and Carney in Family Unfriendly and Virtue Hoarders are talking about how the bourgeois mind has conceived of children as hostages to the future and devoted an unprecedented amount of attention to their upbringing. What makes it so difficult for people to conceive of having children today is not just the fact that houses are so expensive and that jobs are so soul-sucky, which are obviously factors. There's a much bigger amount of stress that goes into all the stuff that you're supposedly supposed to do for and with children that were never requirements. And I would say the PMC era goes far beyond this. And so for Christopher Lasch, he's not going to say PMC. He's not talking about the professional managerial class. He's not going to put it that way. That way is, Barbara Ehrenreich's way. I think that Lasch is a little bit more orthodox in his Marxism, the way he thinks about class. And so all he's going to say is professionalization and stuff like that. He still thinks of it as part and parcel to the bourgeois mind. I make a sharp distinction between the bourgeois mind and the PMC mind. I think there's a huge difference, and it doesn't help to lump one under the other. But with that said, the PMCification of child rearing takes what he's talking about that was already true in the previous century and turns it up to what makes it a whole new level, where quantity and quality make it like a whole other thing altogether, right? The soccer mom effect is not something that bourgeois moms in the 1920s or the 1820s experienced. And it's so different. And it's so different that when a mom in Family Unfriendly is pointing at a picture in her house of her 4 children, each in their sports uniforms with their trophies, she says, "This was the worst period of my life." That is a unique thing, right? That is unique. It's absolutely unprecedented and also unnecessary. It's not necessary. But with that said, anything you want to say on that before we keep reading?
This is great. And yes, the formation of the bourgeois family, really important. If you haven't read it already, Engels' Family of the Private Property and State kind of helps situate the bourgeois family in time. The idea that children are like these precious things that have to be like, they're like trophy. I don't know. They have to be stuck in a little cage and they have to always be monitored. And, all of your hopes and dreams are pinned on them. This is a relatively recent historical development, as are with the bourgeois family also became the taboo of incest became highly strong and solidified, partly because, again, these are structural concerns brought about by historical material circumstances where the bourgeois family turns in on itself and kind of in that way creates a false division between them as a unit and the world outside. There's two things I'll remind you. One, you wanted to talk about IKEA. Two, I would love to share an Adorno quote, maybe later if we have time. If we don't, no problem. Do you want me to keep reading here by the end?
Yeah, we'll go for like another, probably at least page. Yeah.
Okay. By the end of the 18th century, the main features of the bourgeois family system were firmly established in Western Europe and the United States. The distinctive characteristics of this system can be simply, if somewhat schematically, set forth. Compared with practices in most other societies, marriage took place at a late age and considerable numbers of people remained unmarried. As these demographic facts imply, marriage tended to be arranged by the participants instead of by parents and elders. You keep scrolling for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was enjoying the book version.
No problem. At best, the elders retained a veto. They allowed young couples to court with a minimum of interference on the understanding that their own self-restraint would take the place of adult supervision, an expectation that did not appear unreasonable when courting couples were typically young adults themselves and when young women, moreover, had been trained from an early age to accept advances from the other sex without compromising their reputation. At the same time, men and women did not easily relinquish in marriage the habits of self-inhibition acquired during courtship. The Western marriage system therefore gave rise to much sexual tension and maladjustment, more keenly felt than it would have been felt elsewhere, because marriage ideally rested on intimacy and love. The overthrow of arranged marriage took place in the name of romantic love, and a new conception of the family as a refuge from the highly competitive and often brutal world of commerce and industry. Husband and wife, according to this ideology, were to find solace and spiritual renewal in each other's company. The woman in particular would serve in a well-worn 19th century phrase as an angel of consolation.
Her mission of mercy I'll keep reading it for a little bit here. Her mission of mercy extended to her children as well, around whom middle-class family life increasingly centered. A new idea of childhood helped to precipitate the new idea of the family. No longer seen simply as a little adult, the child came to be regarded as a person with distinctive attributes: impressionability, vulnerability, innocence, which required a warm, protected, and prolonged period of nurture. Whereas formerly children had mixed freely in adult society, parents now sought to segregate them from premature contact with servants and other corrupting influences. Educators and moralists began to stress the child's need for play, for love and understanding, and for the gradual, gentle unfolding of his nature. Child rearing became more demanding as a result, and emotional ties between parents and children grew more intense at the same time that ties to relatives outside the immediate family weakened. Here was another source of persistent tension in the middle-class family, the emotional overloading of the parent-child connection. Still another source of tension was the change in the status of women, which the new family system required. The bourgeois family simultaneously degraded and exalted women. I want to highlight that. The bourgeois family degraded women. It also exalted women. On the one hand, it deprived them of many of their traditional employments, as the household ceased to be a center of production and devoted itself to child rearing instead. On the other hand, the new demands of child rearing, at a time when so much attention was being given to the special needs of the child, made it necessary to educate women for their domestic duties. Better education would also make women more suitable companions for their husbands. The new domesticity implied a thoroughgoing reform and extension of women's education, as Mary Wollstonecraft, the first modern feminist, understood when she insisted that if women were to become affectionate wives and rational mothers, they would have to be trained in something more than accomplishments designed to make young ladies attractive to prospective suitors. Early Republican ideology had as one of its main tenets the proposition that women should become useful rather than ornamental. In the categories immortalized by Jane Austen, women had to give up sensibility in favor of sense. Thus, bourgeois domesticity gave rise to its antithesis, feminism. The domestication of woman gave rise to a general unrest, encouraging her to entertain aspirations that marriage and the family could not satisfy. These aspirations became an important ingredient in the so-called marriage crisis that began to unfold at the end of the 19th century. So with that said, I just wanted to highlight, obviously, Lasch is well aware that there's a big problem for the role, the supposed role of women in the household, thanks to the bourgeoisification of the household, right? And so that's first and foremost. So there's many strains of feminism that will challenge this state of affairs. The problem is that a lot of them will radicalize their perspective and transhistoricize it at the same time. So they take a kind of oppression that is unique to the bourgeois period, and then they project it back through history, and they take everything bad that ever happened to women, and they bundle it all up into a conspiracy theory of patriarchy, and now women are a class of people set in opposition to the class called men, and then they literally just take all of the tools of Marxism, and Marx's like ideas of class warfare, and then they bring that into how they think about the relations between the sexes, to the point where it's just like men are the worst thing ever, right? And I mean, obviously we are. But with that said, there's also something awful and disgusting about Shulamith Firestone's The Dialectic of Sex, or, now I'm going to stop and say, in particular, her work, because, and though I find it a genius work, I think it's very important and it's actually compelling and insightful. It's evil in the way that it takes Marxian conflict theory from a political economic thing and then puts it into the domestic sphere. It's evil in the sense that and when I say evil, I don't use the word lightly, right? But I do not see men as a class that are at war with another class of people called women. And this is like, this would require, I think, a proper lecture where I go deep into it and lay it all out. But I'm just saying, I don't do that with the races, and I don't do that with the sexes. I think that it's a very dangerous thing to start talking about, oh, it's black people versus white people, and we have to read history this way, and they are separate classes, and we need to treat them like they have separate interests. No, we actually have universal interests. We have particular struggles, sometimes, on the basis of these things, but that doesn't mean that we should separate ourselves as a class apart, right? This happens in college departments. This happens in organizations, in corporations. This happens. People start to cluster up, and then they talk about their oppression through this lens. And of course, nobody could ever agree because everybody's radically different. But there's always some prevailing narrative that you're supposed to uphold, or you're the Uncle Tom of your group. You're supposed to maintain some line on the basis of your identity. And if you diverge too much from what you're supposed to be saying as a spokesperson for the group, then you're going to be seen as like a race traitor or a sex traitor. And I just find the whole thing disgusting, because at the end of the day, men need women, women need men. We're dependent upon one another. We literally need one another. We are dependent upon one another. We are at our best when helping one another. And there's nothing good that comes from just seeing it as like a matter of righting the wrongs of a history that is basically a conspiracy theory about the patriarchy. That doesn't mean that patriarchal societies have never existed, or that there aren't patriarchal aspects or policies in any given society. But it just means that when it comes to relating to one another as individuals, seeing ourselves as representatives of classes at war with one another, I find it so problematic that I refuse to do it, or even associate with people who do it at this point. And in a lot of cases, that means it just burns bridges with me and people who are leftists are super wedded to existing legacy institutions, but I don't care. I think that they've lost all public favor and claim to legitimacy, and that people who live in this mindset don't speak for the groups that they try to speak for, and that it's, I mean, at this point, there are, probably 20 books per identity politics category that we could draw from to problematize that spokesmanship, right? And that at the end of the day, it all becomes a game of representation within corporations, within the C-suite, right? It all becomes a big game of social justice would mean more black prison guards or black women prison guards or whatever. It's just, I don't do it, but I don't say it so forcefully because I feel strongly about it right now in this moment. I think there's some residue in me that sometimes when I think back, it's like, yeah, no, I feel frustrated that I spent so many years giving myself over to this mode. And I left it 5 years ago after a decade of a life wasted trying to work with people who can't do anything and who have no plausible way forward for society except for scapegoating 1/4 of the country and acting like that gives de facto lesser evilist legitimacy to their side. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And so I'm drawing a big boundary there in the sand, a big line in the sand, and saying, look, I'm happy to associate with a radical feminist who thinks that Shulamith Firestone is correct and that, men are the representatives of the oppressor class. If we're associating at a barbecue and usually a he, is the only person of that persuasion there. But I would not go to a barbecue where everyone there is of that persuasion, because I do not go into spaces where I am first and foremost seen as a category. It's a form of totalization. It's dehumanization. It undermines your ability to speak and be heard. And I do not like having to try to speak to or be heard by people who see you first and foremost as this little tiny organ in a much larger body that has to function a certain way or be considered bad, right? I think the whole thing is insane. And after having tried for way too long to take it seriously and associate with such people and go to the barbecues where that was the prevailing assumption, I now say, no, I'm very happy associating with anybody who believes in such things and wants to talk about them theoretically, as long as that person knows that they are the freak fringe in my world. And they know that I'm not relating to them as though they hold social power in my life, because they don't. And I'm happy to have a theoretical conversation with such a person. But no, I'm not going to navigate institutions where the horizon of possibility is defined by your to the degree to which you do that dance for that progressive liberal big other, right? It's no, not interested in that. But with that said, though, I think that Christopher Lasch is the sort of progressive whisperer. He's actually an aspirational model. If progressives still read books, they would have already changed. They don't read books, they read fake books, the fake kind of books that you see on like the Oprah's reading club lists, but they don't read real books like this one. He's writing this book, I believe, in the 70s or 80s at a time when progressives were already kind of not reading, right? This is the age of amusing ourselves to death. And when they read fake books. They read slop. They read stuff that is kind of produced so that you can stand around the water cooler and say, oh yeah, the new thing by Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, I read that, right? Which, no judgment, but it's not a book in this kind of sense that this is a book. And so when I say that he's like this sort of progressive PMC whisperer, I mean that, like, for those of you who feel a lot more tolerant or patient than I am, or maybe called to continue having conversations with the kinds of people who are embedded in those institutions and who are committed to navigating such horizons of possibility, I think Lasch might help you a lot in having those conversations with those kinds of people. For personally, I find consolation from him, and he helps me theorize things. But the whole like, oh, I'm going to become the progressive PMC whisperer calling, like that, I do not feel. I tried to fit into it for a couple of years, and it was probably the most frustrated I've ever been. And so I'm just not going to do it. But I think he's great at it, and I think he's great for that reason. And with that said, now I want to turn it over to the closeout towards the end of Feminism Against Progress. Part of it, it's actually what was being referred to by Keir a little bit ago. And it's this chapter here called Abolish Big Romance. And it follows from what we just read from Christopher Lasch in this sense. Harrington, though she's different than Lasch, definitely agrees on the socially constructed and oppressive, unnatural nature of the bourgeois family. And she brings in a ton of problems with it, and she's constantly railing throughout this book in her own ways against what she calls meat Lego Gnosticism, which is this way in which hyper-modernity, hyper-liberalism takes capital into the body, and it becomes this constant work of modification to try to get nature to align with ideas. And obviously gender affirmative care would be the spicier version of that. We could think of it in 100 other ways as well. Fitness and all the stuff people do with steroids and weightlifting would also be an example of that. The point is that we're not meat Legos, and nature is not something that we need to completely conquer to the point where it has to fit into our nice geometrical ideas of reality. That is an age-old, stupid idea, and it was generally called Gnosticism, and philosophers rail against it for good reason. But yeah, she calls it meat Lego Gnosticism because people act like, yeah, I'll just chop my boobs off and cut my nose off and replace this with that and move this over here and replace it. Okay, that's what she's challenging. Well, she's awesome because she understands how much that's related to capital and a specific phase of capital development in what, Byung-Chul Han would call psychopolitics. But with that said, this chapter in particular, I think is worth reading, especially after we just had this anti-feminist lecture from an actual conservative who he expressed, disagreements with Mary Harrington. And why does he have disagreements with Mary Harrington? Well, for several reasons. He said it's because she's a reactionary and he's not as reactionary as she is. That's because he's more pro-liberal free markets than she is. But also, it's because he just doesn't think that feminism can be reformed. I think feminism is quickly in a process of reformation, as evidenced by the work of Mary Harrington, Louise Perry, Nina Power, and the interests in their themes that I see from all of the women in my life, or at least most of the women in my life. So that's not to say that all the women in my life or most of the women in my life are reading these women, but it is to say these women are speaking to the things that most of the women in my life take very seriously. And so I'm saying that whether Scott Yenor thinks it's possible or not, feminism is definitely in a process of reforming itself. And because of Harrington and people like her, I think that could be a good thing. I'm not going to go out on a limb and make bets the way that Yenor might, but I can respect where he's coming from and at the same time say, hey, you know what? Harrington might have a real shot at doing what she's trying to do here. Who knows? But with that said, she's calling for the abolition of big romance. Big romance is something in particular that comes from the era of the bourgeois family, right? And so that's kind of the connection to what we just did with Lasch. Now, Kier, if you have a physical copy of Feminism Against Progress handy and are interested in reading, cool. Otherwise, I wouldn't want you to read from the screen, but I just thought maybe you have a physical copy, so that would be cool if you did.
I do not, but thanks for asking.
Cool. All right, but let's take it away. So the opening a quote here is by Leo Strauss. Warriors and workers of all countries, unite while there is still time to prevent the coming of the realm of freedom. Defend with might and main, if it needs to be defended, the realm of necessity. And that's one of the other things throughout this book. She is critiquing freedom as this virtue that gets prioritized above all else. By the way, she's doing it in the exact way that Marx was doing it, but she takes it into her critique of feminism as well. Okay, but with that said, I'll read a paragraph here, and then, Sai, if you're handy, you can take it after that. We're now well beyond peak progress. The decades since the turn of the millennium have seen two international banking crises, terrorist attacks, a return of great power politics, a global pandemic, war in Europe, rocketing inflation, and, at the time of writing, an energy crunch. And whatever your views on how to address it, man-made climate change is growing difficult to deny, even for those ideologically committed to pretending it isn't happening. The perma-crisis shows no sign of abating. Our current trajectory promises to make life poorer, tougher, and more uncertain for all but the richest.
If the world is growing less stable, we're going to need to rely on one another. Where resources falter, strong relationships can make up some of the shortfall. But we face this unsettled future less well supported on this front than ever, thanks to a culture that sweeps us ever further into atomization. And this is especially a problem for mothers, as Abigail Tucker shows. The happiest mothers are those with good social support networks. If this is true in prosperous times, it's orders of magnitudes more so in tough times. Swimming against the atomizing current, then, is an urgent priority for reactionary feminists. This applies even, or perhaps especially, to those of us raised as good little hyper-individualists in a culture hell-bent on liquefying and commodifying every form of relationship.
Now, I'll keep going here in a second, but I want to say one of the very moving parts of this book is the very beginning when she says that the thing that really woke her up to her current position was pregnancy itself. And she says, in losing my faith, right at the beginning, page 3, Against Progress, what started me down the path towards writing this book was feeling like I wasn't a separate person from my baby. Before I had a child, I had no idea how I'd feel once she was there, though I had a dim sense that pregnancy and birth usually does something far-reaching to the emotional landscapes of women who experience it. Even so, the starkness of the contrast between how I'd experienced the world previously and how I experienced it once my daughter was in my life still took me by surprise. And she talks about how it changed her physically and then emotionally, and then brought her all the way down to realizing that she had been indoctrinated into what she calls progress theology, which sees progress as liberation from nature and dependency, and sees dependency as inherently bad, and sees freedom as something that is necessarily free of dependency. And therefore, freedom becomes naturally anti-natalist. It's a whole thing. It's beautiful. I love what she does there. But with that said, I'll read the next paragraph and pass it back. Resistance means opting for beneficial constraints, which enable us to live well. Happily on this front, there already exists a vintage social technology we can deploy as a first step in resisting the atomizing pressures of cyborg theocracy, if we can only upcycle it for the 21st century. Marriage. It's not a magic bullet to solve every challenge we face. Nothing will ever do this. Nor, as even happily married people will tell you, is every marriage a utopia. But women who are mothers flourish in a less liquid social fabric. And married family units, the smallest possible commons outside the market, are essential to creating that stability.
In parts of the world where cyborg theocracy is now dominant, this is a virulently countercultural view. For where markets rule, they come with songs of praise to being alone. Think of Honor Jones writing about how she loved her husband, but still divorced him because their marriage wasn't self-expressive enough, and he was an obstacle to her personal fulfillment. The siren call of atomization comes from everywhere and legitimizes itself in many ways. Girl power, self-actualization, and embittered men's rights activism, for example, are mirroring ideologies driving the same decline into loneliness and mutual hostility.
For both of these perspectives, marriage is tantamount to prostitution, a fake contract that enables exploitation of one sex by the other. Far better to deregulate relations between the sexes altogether and let everyone embrace market forces as they see fit. And whether it serves to legitimize abandoning relationships that don't measure up to the self-expressive gold standard, or as a cynical foil for calls to marketize still further, big romance is centrally implicated in this dynamic.
How do we detransition from here? Some conservatives dream of abolishing second wave feminism, which is to say returning to a pre-1960s understanding of marriage, and with it, the traditional relation between men and women. This is usually understood to mean the sex roles typical of the industrial model, in which women serve as principal domestic consumers while relying on their husband's goodwill and good character to offset the loss of agency this implies under the order of economic sex. In other words, we should keep everything the same, except what women do.
Such proposals, by the way, that's your critique in part of Dr. Jenner. Such proposals seem blind or indifferent to the fact that this would be subject to all the structural downsides that drove women to abandon this model in the first place. And in any case, those material conditions are long gone, right? That was what Christopher Lasch's portion of Haven and a Heartless World was all about. Those conditions are gone. Now we're in the bourgeois situation. But oh wait, now the bourgeois situation's conditions are also gone. So it's like, do we really want to go back to that bourgeois situation, which itself was like this weird anomaly? Very, very historically contingent. In most social strata, both sexes work. And in many US cities, women under 30 out-earn their male peers, at least until they become mothers. A fact that makes interdependence optional rather than necessary for most couples. In this context, dual earner households are now the norm in both the UK and the US, and the two-income trap means supporting a stay-at-home parent is economically unfeasible below a certain earning threshold. But the weakness of these proposals isn't that they're unworkable or even that they're traditional, but that they're not traditional enough. For most of history, men and women worked together in a productive household, and this is the model reactionary feminism should aim to retrieve. In any case, half a century into the cyborg era, there's little prospect of reviving the industrial era housewife as the principal template for sex roles. And there's no need, because for knowledge workers, at least the sharp split between home and work that drove the emergence of such roles is blurring again. And the blurring of that divide, in turn, opens up new possibilities, hinting a way of viewing lifelong solidarity between the sexes that owes more to the 1450s than the 1950s. It does so by bringing at least some work back into the home, and in the process, ramping up the kind of interdependence that can underpin long-term, pragmatic solidarity.
Remote work, e-commerce, and the portfolio career are not without risks. They can bring increased employer surveillance or economic precarity, for example. But cyborg developments also offer scope for families to carve out their lives where both partners blend family obligations, public-facing economic activity, and rewarding local community activities in productive mixed economy households, where both partners are partly or wholly home-based and work collaboratively on the common tasks of the household, whether money earning, food production, childcare, or housekeeping.
Yeah. This is why Anne and I both see Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire as so pathetic when he boasts that he doesn't even know how to work the washing machine. It's like, well, then how are you helping your wife even like just on those odd days out when she's sick or when she's pregnant? come on, man. But then, of course, we go far beyond that, because for us, we really are like DIY symbolic order, pioneering a new way of being. And the idea that we would just superimpose some 1950s model onto our current conditions is insane. That's a middle class suburbanite model. And we aren't middle class and we're not suburbanite. And yeah, we're actually part of a productive household. There's a literal farm here, right? Some are already pioneering this model. One young woman I interviewed is Willow, 25, a writer based in rural Canada, who married at 23 and is co-creating a domestic economy with her husband Phil that's clearly an update on the pre-modern arrangements we saw in part 1. Along with her writing projects, she and Phil work together on carpentry projects, where they divide the work roughly into first fix, which requires more strength and which Phil does, and finishing work, which requires more patience and manual dexterity, where Willow excels. Their baby is too small for Willow to do much in the workshop at present, but she's active in finding him clients and sometimes also apprentices, as well as tending a small holding, and will return to carpentry in due course. Dude, you could just, if you had access to a shop and could just make tiny houses year round, you could sell those for like 30 to 150,000 bucks a pop. And that's a great thing that you could do with your partner. But if you didn't want to do that with your partner, you know what you could do? Make catios. People need catios. It's like a good thing. If you care about cats, they need to be able to have unrestricted access to the outside, but they also need to be safe and, leave the bird population alone. If you're in town, that really matters, because they can do quite a lot of damage to the local ecosystem. Well, build a catio. A cat patio is where the cat door like gives them this unrestricted access to outside. Well, people need that. People want that, and you can make them custom. And I've built one with Anne, and it was a great time, and it was useful for the year that we used it. And those kinds of activities are a great way of bonding with someone who you love and are co-creating a world with. From an anti-industrial feminist perspective, Willow's approach is unconscionably in hoc to patriarchy. She married young, views childcare as largely her domain, and is not the main money earner. But from the perspective of a feminism against progress, Willow is pursuing her interests as an embodied woman in her relational context, rather than as an atomized, abstract human in an inconveniently female body. Having decided relatively young that she wanted children as well as economic and political agency, and that she didn't want a conventional career that compelled her to spend long periods away from her children, she set about creating a household where she can have these things and can have them at the point of maximum energy and fertility in her early 20s. As such, Willow had little time for the now pervasive advice given to young women to defer marriage and kids until you're ready. She heard them out, she says, but in my heart, I didn't have any concerns. Rather, as she puts it, getting married was the foundation of the life I wanted to build. Willow is right at the start of creating her household, but others are well established on the same track. Ashley, 36, is a decade into building hers. She and her husband live in Uruguay, where both do part-time remote language teaching while managing. Sorry, I think I said that wrong. I said it like the philosopher, Uruguay, and this is, I think that is not how you say this country. Please help me, dear God. How do you say it? Do you guys know, or was I saying it correctly?
Uruguay.
Thank you, Uruguay. Where both do part-time remote language teaching while managing a homestead where they teach courses on low-carbon living and caring for 3 young children. This lifestyle enabled Ashley to realize the goal she and her husband set for their life together, centering family as the core of our meaning-making. In retrieving something like the pre-modern model for family life, where the household is the center of both family and economic activity, Willow and Ashley are paradoxically ahead of the curve. They're weaving work and children back together in a way that hasn't been possible for mothers since the Industrial Revolution. With it, too, They're pioneering the reactionary feminist alternative to mainstream conservatives' futile call for a return to traditional, which is to say industrial, sex roles. Willow and Ashley are absolutely not abolishing feminism. Both view their approach as making space for themselves to be women as well as humans. What they are abolishing is big romance. In a material context where women are structurally at an economic and political disadvantage, as we have seen historically, it makes sense to promote and pursue emotional closeness as the key benchmark of a beneficial long-term relationship. Very starkly, if your husband loves and respects you, the fact that in absolute terms he has economic power over you is less likely to threaten your well-being. Over time, though, the liberal feminist demand to enter market society on the same terms as men has been broadly achieved. But as we've seen, memes often take a while to catch up with material conditions. And part of what makes contemporary sex relations so muddled and unhappy is the persistence of big romance. In its self-expressive form, long after its material basis has all but disappeared. For with this change, big romance stopped mediating relations between men and women and began actively militating against them. If we're to rebuild solidarity, a very first step is in backing out of the blind alley currently followed by feminists and anti-feminists alike, in which heterosexual marriage is decried as a malign bait and switch, indistinguishable from prostitution. All right, anyone have any comments on that before I close this thing out? Happy to hear from anybody.
This was my favorite part of Mary Harrington's book for sure. I think the 1950s slash industrial gender roles leave a lot to be desired. And I think it was maybe Tony of One Time who was saying like the problem in the 50s was that the dads were never at home, not that the moms were at home too much, or something to that effect, where it was like, you know, sending both parents out of the home is like a strange response to that. And I think, you know, yeah, trying to think of the home as, I don't know, like potentially a more holistic place where you can find a flow with the person that you're living with, that plays to your strengths and that honestly maybe does give you a bit of relief or distance from like a soul sucking 9 to 5, is something that I find like very, very inspiring. And I think I was reading at this about the same time this biography of Vladimir and Vera Nabokov, and it really struck me that first of all they went like butterfly catching for like 4 months a year um, between semesters, but also that whenever he was working against a deadline with one of his books, his wife taught for him. And that was just how it went. And I found myself like, you know, really kind of aggrieved after reading that. I don't know if aggrieved is the right word, but just feeling grief that like, you know, we're so atomized that we're not even able to like step in to relieve one another within a partnership around different types of labor, right? Like you can't show up for your husband's job and be like, I'll do it today. He's not feeling well, you know, and just like how much like bureaucracy that brings into our life. And yeah, trying to find little loopholes is very appealing.
Thank you. Anything you got, Sai? And if you don't have anything on that, you could always say what you want to say about Adorno as well. I'm going to step away and listen.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. This has been really great. Yeah, I think if you know me for any length of time, I'll eventually talk about Adorno just because it's just one of those models for me of somebody who really thought through these things long before we have ever thought about them, you know, and in the 50s and before in the 30s and whatnot. But in any case, in his reflections, Minima Moralia, which he wrote in exile, fleeing from the Holocaust, he writes this very poignant aphorism called Grassy Seat. It's sort of right at the beginning of the book, I think. It might even be the second one, where he talks about the like intergenerational trauma, kind of, or like how we think of our parents. It starts by saying our relationships to parents is beginning to undergo a sad, shadowy transformation. Through their economic impotence, they have lost their awesomeness. Once we rebelled against their insistence on the reality principle, the sobriety forever prone to become wrath against those less ready to renounce. But today we were faced with a generation purporting to be young, yet in all its reactions, insufferably more grown up than its parents ever were, which, having renounced before any conflict, draws from this its grimly authoritarian, unshakable power. That's how it starts. But the quote I wanted to draw our attention to is at the end. He says, one realizes with horror that earlier, opposing one's parents because they represented the world, one was often secretly the mouthpiece against a bad world of an even worse one. So in that saying, you know, for instance, I'll make it particularly personal. My dad had a strong critique against the hippies. How did he take this? How did he kind of bring this into his person? Well, he renounced all forms of pleasure and became an ascetic, basically. So then how did I rebel? Right? So these are the way these like intergenerational chains or arguments go on. I ended up becoming the mouthpiece of an even worse world than the one that he stood for. Unpolitical attempts to break out of the bourgeois family usually lead only to deeper entanglement in it. And it sometimes seems as if the fatal germ cell of society, the family, were at the same time the nurturing germ cell of uncompromising pursuit of another. With the family, there passes away while the system lasts, not only the most effective agency of the bourgeoisie, right? So it's where oppression begins and the thing that we want to maybe struggle against if we're for change, if we're on the left, but also the resistance which, though repressing the individual, also strengthened, perhaps even produced him, right? So it represses the individual. We rebel against that, and yet it produces it, and it's in our rebellion. The end of the family paralyzes the forces of opposition. The rising collectivist order is a mockery of a classless one. Together with the bourgeois, it liquidates the utopia that once drew sustenance from motherly love. So Adorno cautions us to not basically seek family abolition, that only really in the family are we capable of even cultivating an outside to capitalism or a countervailing pressure against capitalism. And I just really like that, the unpolitical attempts to break out of the family. There are many of those today, including, if you have a lot of time, polyamory, right? Or other sorts of like, dinkism or, the queering of traditional gender roles, all of which perfectly fit into hyper-individualist culture, none of which actively fight against capitalism in any way, structurally speaking, in my opinion. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to share, what it made me think of. There's actually several passages in Minima Moralia this made me think of, but this is a good one I wanted to share.
Thank you. That's really good. I'll just close this out by, on the whiteboard, pointing to where I wrote, what is a man? An economic function? What is a woman? And of course, what is a woman seems to be that question that the left is the least capable of answering. It makes someone as stupid as Matt Walsh look smart when he asks, sociologists in the documentary, what is a woman? It makes him look smart just because they talk around the fact that their definition is a circular definition. A woman is a person who identifies as a woman, and then he always goes, but what are they identifying as? So they're identifying as a woman, which is a person who identifies as a woman. But what is a woman? A person who identifies as one. So it becomes absolutely hollow. There's nothing there. Well, why? And everyone knows that a woman is an adult female. But of course, you're not allowed to say that on the left. And there's so much more that I would like to say about such things, about the black swan effect, about how even if you wanted to court that kind of an audience, you could just be like, well, there's women. And then there's trans women or whatever you want to do. But you can't do that. That requires too much thinking. No thinking allowed here, folks. It's just what people identify as. And like I'm saying, it makes it so that people like Matt Walsh, who are not smart at all, can appear smart. And of course, it's the hill that they will die on, and they're never going to get off of it because it makes them look smart. And they're not going to get off of it as long as it does. And so it's not going to go away. And eventually, someday in the future, 5, 10 years, 20 years in the future, I have a dream that one day my children will live in a world where the left can say what a woman is again. It's possible. It's possible. But I'm not going to hold out my hope or wait for people to find their courage to speak again. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And in the meantime, what I will say is a common thread between Christopher Lasch and Mary Harrington when it comes to this question of what a woman is. They would definitely not say that a woman is, at her best, someone who's trying to be what a man is at his worst. And that is what capital turned men into. It turned them into their worst. This idea of an independent economic function, a calculating, rational agent who purely thinks in terms of efficiency and profit. The idea of liberation for women, meaning women also get to be that, is what they're kind of talking about when they're talking about second wave feminism. There's some good things there. Women being able to do stuff, obviously. But the bad thing is when people see this kind of independence as freedom, when independence is also part of the definition of love. Or sorry, dependence is also part of the definition of love. Dependence is part of the definition of love. It's not just fond feelings about somebody. It's showing up for that person. It's caring for that person, right? And then if we're going to talk about respect, and we use G.K. Chesterton's description of it, it's the degree to which you are inconvenienced for the sake of that person, right? Respect and love means being inconvenienced for a person, being at their disposal to some extent. And obviously that has been abused, and there are entire societies built around that abuse, and that would be what real patriarchy is. And so, the baby in the bathwater obviously is there. But what we're talking about here, when we're talking about modern, liberal, progressive capitalism, is where men have been removed from any kind of responsibilities to anything other than the market imperatives. And they are out there competing with one another. And then that's seen as freedom. Okay. It's not. It's not. It creates a sort of disablement. It means that you are dispossessed of the ability to really do and think in a higher human way. And you are instead reduced to something that is slavish, something that is at the beck and whim of the economy. So what philosophy of stewardship is, in part, about is finding out for ourselves what it means to be a man or a woman. In a world where our parents and our grandparents most likely have really weird ideas about what it is to be a man or a woman. Really weird ideas. But they're not that weird if you just think about the material conditions in history from which they come. It makes sense for them to think the things that they think, but that doesn't mean that we have to. And so for me, that means a constant work of discovery and of experimentation And in a sort of sense, I'm gender bending just as much as I ever was in learning to be a father, right? Well, similarly, I find a sense of delight and wonder in just realizing that, yeah, I was a poor person roommate guy who never could put a shelf on the wall and change his own oil. And I don't have to be like that anymore. I get to do things now. And that's exciting and I love it. And so I'll close out on the thing that Sai reminded me to say, which is the thing about IKEA. So I said in the Discord forum something about going to IKEA and how I think it's a great idea to go to IKEA and walk around and just get ideas about the kind of house that you want to live in. Obviously, trial and error is going to show you that some of those visions provided by commercial commodities aren't actually suited for a good, useful relationship with your things. But also a lot of it is very smart. A lot of the design is very smart. And walking around, you can take pictures of things that you like and you can put those things on your vision board. And so I think that you should probably, keep that in mind. And then with that said, you don't even have to buy the things from IKEA. And by the way, there's no IKEA close to me. We had to drive way out of way. It was on the way to Vancouver. So that's what, we did it outside of Seattle. But you don't have to buy things from there because first of all, you can just build things yourself. Obviously, this is just window shopping. But also, there's an awesome website. I think it was called hackingikea.net. I linked, whatever it's actually called, I linked it in the Discord. And yeah, hacking IKEA or IKEA hacking is like the DIY space in which people show you how to build all the stuff that you can get at IKEA. So, walk around as window shopping and get the experience of seeing all of this, like these epic layouts that they do. But then, you can always go build it yourself. I almost got into building what I'm about to show you all, but there was a basic time, energy trade-off, and I decided to just buy a bunch of them. And I haven't regretted a single one of the ones that I bought. And so with that said, it's the Kalex unit. Do you guys know what this is or what these are? The Kalex units? I'll see if this camera can turn here and show you this one. Let's see.
Yes, babe, you were admiring my Kalex while you were here.
I was indeed. Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, those are great. And Anne was like, yeah. But then we went to IKEA and I was like, there's so many kinds of them. So yeah, you see right here, I have them now. And I also have a whole wall of them on the other side of this room. And then we have a bunch of them upstairs. Why do I love them? Well, I'll ask you really quick here. What in particular stands out to you? Like, why did you like them as opposed to a regular bookcase?
It was a quick way to make the best use of a wall and just make as much of the wall into shelf as possible. And then I also like that it's modular, so it's great for books, but it works for board games. It works really well for records. And then you can also put baskets and doors in them and stuff. So it just makes it really easy to hide a lot of clutter or display things.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. It makes you feel kind of like you're a bee in a beehive too, which is fun. And so I have a million things, or we could say they all break down into different tribes, and Kalex units are really good for separating those tribes from one thing to another. And I'll show an example here. I'm not going to turn the camera around, but I'll just pull a couple of baskets out. Here's a basket of electronics. It just goes inside of one of those units or one of those cubes. Here's a basket of gloves, right? Different gloves. I'm always like, where are gloves? Where are gloves? Well, now they have their own shelf and I throw them in the basket all the time and it feels satisfying to do it. And the final thing I'll say about that is that we were always like, where do things go? Where do things go? Where do things go? Like they don't go on the table, but they're always piling up on the table. There's just this huge, I can hear myself. There's this huge problem with tables. And the Kalex units are nice because, turning the camera back here again. Yeah, see, I've got books there, but then I've also got my water bottle here in front of the books. It's like having a miniature table, except there's another one beside it and another one underneath it and another one underneath that. And the big realization, or like a sort of epiphany that I had, was like, oh, so wait, everywhere that there's something like a box, there could be a whole tower of Calyx cubes. Here, I'm going to actually change the scene here so you can all see what Kira is showing on her. There we go. Look at that. Kira's showing right now. That's a really great layout. Yeah, look at all those ones. They're all color coded. There's like the darker ones on the bottom that you pull out. There's the lighter ones you pull out. Then there's all the just the books. Yeah. Yeah, but if you have, say, a box on the floor space, let's go ahead and just do it like this. There's a box or a thing right here. That is a waste of all this space. 7, 8, 9 feet of space there. If you're in tight quarters, and we're in very tight quarters, the kitty litter box takes up this, what is it, probably 2 feet. You want to come up? Or, yeah. Here, I'll give you, Anne's officially in the room, and I'm going to give her a microphone so she can say what she wanted to say. Here you go. Wait, there you go.
Yeah, the cat box is probably about 1.5 by 1 foot. But then it sits in this prime real estate in the corner. Oh, sorry. We're moving me from the meeting. Because my phone is playing out loud. Yeah, it takes up this prime real estate. It was even something we were talking about in our meeting today, how your mom loves to do, where she brings some of her farm work up to the kitchen, but in turn the kitchen becomes a second office desk, and she's got a kind of short little filing cabinet. But then what if we actually put some shelves, replace the filing cabinet with a Kalex type thing, whether it's a 1x4 or 2x4, and then there's more places to just move the paperwork so that she can continue to do her work at the kitchen table like she likes doing in the mornings and the evenings, but still utilize that space more.
Yeah. And so, yeah, modularity becomes really important when we're thinking about these things, but also maximizing the ability to do the things that you're doing the most in certain spaces where certain kinds of activities intersect the most. This is actually a principle from permaculture for people who get into that kind of thing, but it's really just a basic household economics insight. And so with that said, yeah, I have a sort of childish wonder about the fact that we can constantly take ownership over and steward the places in which we live. And if you are somewhere listening to this where you're still renting some shitty apartment like we were just a year ago, and maybe it's 5 to 10 years out before you get to put shelves up where you want to. Well, you can at least put the Kalex units up, and you can get knockoff Kalex units or build them yourself.
There are so many on Marketplace.
It's cheap,
yeah.
It's easy, and it's just, as far as basic life things, a huge shift in the last 2 weeks for us. It's been amazing. And with that, I'm gonna close this thing out.
Except I came to show the fine people something very special that you only see on the farm once in a blue moon. This is an egg. We've all seen an egg, but it's an egg that doesn't have the hard shell. Every couple months we'll get one egg that is shell. Yeah, Saya's whoa. it just doesn't, like, this egg doesn't have a calcium buildup. And so we can still eat it. We can still crack it open like an egg, but it's like a little squishy stress ball. And I just think it's the coolest thing ever. Sometimes we get massive eggs, and then sometimes every once in a while you get an egg like that big, and it's just fun. It's fun to see the diversity. We got another egg today. Hold that for just 1 second. That's like that tall. Like, it's huge. It's not going to fit in an egg
like a goose egg.
It's not going to fit in an egg carton. Anyways, I just wanted to show you guys this egg.
Yeah, the first time Anne saw one of those, she was disgusted by it, as was I when I was a kid.
Now I'm like, look at this egg.
As a kid, the first time I saw one of those, I was like, it's a reptile thing. It's like, it just feels wrong. But then, the size variation also just, it's one of the incredible things about having chickens. They're not all standardized. It's so great to have that variability. Okay, with that, thanks everybody, and hope to see a lot more people next time. It'll be on the first Sunday of every month from now on. Thanks, Kier, thanks, Sai, and thanks everyone else who was able to make it. Peace.
Bye.